messages we heard from Foreign Minister Jaishankar in Russia were not dissimilar in some ways from what we heard from Prime Minister Modi at the UN. India again reaffirmed that it stands against this war, that it wants to see dialogue, it wants to see diplomacy. It's important that the Russians hear that message from countries around the world. It's especially important that the Russians hear that message from countries like India, our neighbors that have economic, diplomatic, social, and political might. Now is not the time for business as usual with Russia.
Indian Foreign Minister is visiting Moscow very soon. And as you know, that India is becoming the largest Russian oil customer after China, and expanding their trade ties. Recently, U.S. Treasury Secretary was in India to talk about these things. In your opinion, why United States is not able to convince India to stay away from Russia in these difficult hours?
The messages we heard from Foreign Minister Jaishankar in Russia were not dissimilar in some ways from what we heard from Prime Minister Modi at the UN when he made very clear that this is not an era of war. India again reaffirmed that it stands against this war, that it wants to see dialogue, it wants to see diplomacy, it wants to see an end to this needless bloodshed that Russia is responsible for inside of Ukraine. It's important that the Russians hear that message from countries around the world. It's especially important that the Russians hear that message from countries like India that are neighbors, that have economic, diplomatic, social, and political might. And that's precisely the message that Foreign Minister Jaishankar delivered. When it comes to India's relationship with Russia, we've consistently made the point that it's a relationship that developed and was cemented over the course of decades, really came to be during the Cold War, at a time when the United States was not in a position to be an economic partner. We've been intentional about exempting oil and gas, the energy sector, from the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. So the fact that India has high demand for energy, that it continues to seek oil and other forms of energy from Russia, that is not something that runs afoul of the sanctions that have been imposed. We've also been clear that now is not the time for business as usual with Russia, and it's incumbent on countries around the world to do what they can to lessen those economic ties with Russia. That's something that's in the collective interest, but it's also in the bilateral interest of countries around the world to end, and certainly over the course of time, to wean their dependence on Russian energy.